Fab. Okay, bro. I think most people are here. You happy if I start, Han? Give us a shout if not. So I'm Rachel Hayes. I'm Associate Director at Regen, and I'm currently on secondment into the COP unit in the Cabinet Office as part of the strategy team. So I thought, it seemed most appropriate that I would chair today's session and talk to you all about Race to Zero. So yeah, as I say, do put your name, say hi in the chat, try and have a bit of a conversation as we're going along, because I think we're hoping that these sessions will be able to kind of share as many kind of hacks and intel and thoughts on this as we go along and as we kind of build up momentum as we go through. So today we're going to talk about what the clean energy sector will be doing in the run up to COP, with a particular focus on Race to Zero. I'm sure many of you attended the event that we did with all the trade associations and government back at the end of May as a kind of first step in this process. And we're at Regen, and generally as the sector, we're really excited about having COP on home turf. The clean energy sector has been at the forefront of delivery, and decarbonising our energy sector sits firmly on our shoulders. We've made massive progress to date with mass deployment of renewables. So I think that's something we should all be very proud of, certainly, in our efforts to tackle the climate crisis. Looking forward, we've got way more to come with decarbonising heat and our buildings, as well as meeting our targets on EVs. We all know that there's lots in the government's 10-point plan from the autumn, and that we're still waiting on lots of the detail from the 10-point plan in terms of the heat and building strategy, the net zero review, the net zero strategy, all of which are expected ahead of COP this year. So at some point, potentially, well, hopefully at least before the summer recess, we can expect much of that, to at least the heat and building strategy and the hydrogen strategy, to come out, and maybe the transport decarbonisation plan. So there's lots coming, and lots of the detail that we've all been waiting for. But whilst we've made massive progress as a sector, we know that we can't rest on our laurels. So I guess first things first, COP is an acronym that's being thrown around quite a lot. So what does that really mean? Just so we're on the same page. So from the 1st to the 12th of November this year, the UK will host the 26th UN Climate Change Conference of the Parties, so COP26, in partnership with Italy, and it's set to be the largest international summit the UK has ever hosted. The summit will bring together parties for the first 5-year review of the Paris Agreement. So that's the kind of ratchet mechanism where everyone kind of submits their NDCs, and then each year, in a 5-year cycle, they ratchet them up to kind of increase their ambition. And it's vital that the UK galvanises global action to reach the ambitious targets of the UNFCCC. So delegates who are coming along includes heads of state, climate experts, and negotiators who will all congregate in Glasgow over those 2 weeks. The real nub, I guess, of the challenge for COP26 is this event is happening at a moment of crisis for the global climate, and what we now need to deliver to keep 1.5 degrees possible is extremely challenging. This makes this decade unprecedented in the transition that we need to see in terms of policy, in terms of investment, and in terms of the technology that we need to deliver. This is all happening amongst a pretty chaotic backdrop where we're recovering from COVID-19 and where globally we want to see a fairer, cleaner and greener recovery for all of us. So I think we're really excited about the future, despite that at times that it feels, the challenge can feel overwhelming. But the Race to Zero is a really kind of positive way that the sector is coming together to kind of demonstrate our enthusiasm. So joining the Race to Zero, so far we've seen 3,067 businesses, 733 cities, 173 investors, and 31 regions. So there are 2 main routes for businesses who are joining the Race to Zero. For bigger companies, this is via the Business Ambition for 1.5 degrees, and for SMEs, it's via the SME Climate Hub. So far we've seen around 2,000 businesses sign up to the SME Climate Hub. And given that's the kind of primary makeup of Regen members, that's going to be our focus for our efforts today. So I'm very proud to say that Regen has signed up to the SME Climate Hub, and today we're joined by our colleague Mark, who has been leading this process for us. We're very lucky to have Mark. He definitely knows what he's talking about. I'll let him demonstrate that to you in a bit. And this is the first of our sessions with Regen and ESM members, where we hope to inspire you in the first instance to commit pen to paper to sign up to the Race to Zero. And following that, we want to share our journeys, steal the good bits from each other, any hacks, and really accelerate our progress to net zero and learn from each other. So today we'll hear from my colleague Mark, and following that we'll also hear from GEMSERV, where Alex will talk about their experience, and then we'll open the floor and we'll have a good chat and discussion. So you can put your cameras on, you can unmute yourselves, and you can kind of chip in, and we'll have a good chat about some of the issues and experiences that have cropped up so far, as well as the opportunities that it's presented. So Mark, I'm going to welcome you. You're going to kick us off. I think you've got a few slides. So yeah, I'm going to start just before. So tell us something interesting about yourself, Mark, that no one really knows that's not related to work.
Oh, crikey. I don't know. I'm a keen amateur musician, been in a few bands.
Okay. I didn't know that. That is very cool. Very good.
I'm not very good, but I'm enthusiastic.
Well, I think that's kind of all that matters, really.
Part of the job, isn't it?
Well, okay. I will leave the floor to you.
Okay, thanks very much. Good afternoon. It is the afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, I'm Mark Howard from Regen. Hopefully Hannah's about to put up some slides. There we go. Look at that. So I'm going to talk to you a bit today about our net zero target. So we've got a 2030 net zero commitment that we've made under the SME Climate Hub umbrella of Race to Zero. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that and try and really to talk about this sort of, because this is focused mostly on members, SME members. I'm going to talk a bit about the SME Climate Hub and their sort of strategic guidance and how that fits in and how we've interpreted that. So I'm not going to go into massive detail about all of our work, but talking largely about the sort of process, and which is pretty similar from company to company. So yeah, can I have a slide, Hannah? It's like I'm on an 80s game show asking for slides. So Rachel's covered most of this already, but obviously the high level challenge is to keep global temperatures from rising more than 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. And to do that, we need to halve our emissions every decade to 2050. And then because there'll be some residual emissions that can't be removed, we need to increase nature-based sinks like peatlands and forests, as well as artificial removals such as DACs and BECCS. Race to Zero is a global campaign to mobilise businesses, cities and regions, investors to meet this goal. Next slide, please. There we go. So the SME Climate Hub is, so it's sort of a way of joining the Race to Zero, aimed specifically at SMEs. And most of what I'm going to talk through here is extracted from the SME Climate Hub playbook, which is a really good 20-page PDF that gives a very straightforward set of guidance really on how to approach getting your business on this trajectory. It's centered around these 4 pillars. So reducing your own emissions, reducing your value chain emissions, integrating climate into your strategy, and then influencing. Next slide, please, Hannah. So I'll talk a bit about that strategy, but first I'll talk about, what is the commitment? What commitments are you making if you sign up to Race to Zero under the SME Climate Hub? It's a really straightforward process. So you literally fill in an online form and press go. That's great. So again, for SMEs, that's a lot easier than some of the other Race to Zero processes. So in signing up to the Race to Zero via SME Climate Hub, you are committing to half your greenhouse gas emissions before 2030 and achieve net zero emissions before 2050. And you can choose, you can sort of choose what your target is, 2050, 2040 or 2030. And you're committing to disclosing your progress on an annual basis. So that's sort of the basic bare bones of it. So it's relatively straightforward. As Rachel mentioned, Regen has joined the SME Climate Hub earlier this year, and we've committed to 2030 target for net zero, which is really challenging. and we have to date produced one sort of annual report, which we actually did before joining the SME Climate Hub, because we were already sort of on this journey at that time. And I'm just in the process now of finishing our second report for 2020. Hannah, can I have a slide, please? So going into those sort of pillars 1, 2, and 3, the first pillar, pillar 1, is reducing your own emissions. And so the first step there is to map out your scope 1 and 2 emissions. So for those unfamiliar with these sort of terms, when we talk about greenhouse gases in carbon accounting, everyone tends to follow the Greenhouse Gas Protocol Initiative, which breaks down emissions into 3 scopes, scopes 1, 2, and 3. Scope 1 is pretty simply direct emissions caused by your organisation. So that's largely combustion of fossil fuels, be that in combustion appliances or in vehicles that the company owns. It also accounts for fluorinated gases that might come from refrigeration equipment. So that's your scope 1 emissions. Scope 2 emissions are indirect, but directly caused by your organisation. That's basically emissions from electricity that you import. And then scope 3 emissions is everything else. So upstream and downstream, things that you buy, and sort of emissions resulting from products or services that you sell. So pillar 1 is looking just at scope 1 and 2 and business travel. It's the key first step to understanding your organisational impact, and it doesn't need to be too daunting because most of the data can be gathered fairly quickly. Hannah, could I have a slide, please? So for Regen, our scope 1 and 2 and business travel looks like this. We're a pretty small organisation. We're about 30 people with one office down in Exeter. We have sort of put here the sort of, just to illustrate the relatively straightforward data gathering process, is that you can get most of this from energy bills. For us, we get our heating from a service charge bill, and we already obviously gather mileage claims and taxi bookings and train bookings. So this initial step is a relatively straightforward thing to do. And from that, you can sort of start to break things down a little bit more and analyze and understand what you can do to reduce those emissions. I've put up there that accuracy tops precision. So often people can get a bit tied up in getting the exact precise number of how many miles a taxi went on, but actually you might not know that because you just get a taxi receipt. So in cases like that, we've gone for accuracy and said, well, you know, how much do we actually spend on taxis? How much does it warrant spending time getting the exact data, or do we need a reasonable indication of where we are with things and getting ourselves on the right trajectory? So that's the reason for that point there. So we're using proxies where it's appropriate. Can I have another slide, please, Hannah? So from this, we've been able to create a pillar 1 action plan, so addressing our own emissions. We've already been doing a lot of good practice stuff in the office, so switching off lights and screens, energy efficiency with our heating system. We've had thermostatic valves installed. We have a long history of having a sort of business travel policy where we favour low carbon travel, such as rail, and we try and avoid air travel wherever we can. We're trying to go one step further at the moment by investigating use of a car club with electric vehicles for business mileage. So we're very fortunate in Exeter to have a very active car club that offers electric vehicles to hire by the hour. So that's something we're hoping to use to reduce further our business travel impact. We're trying to resolve the ever present green tariff question about the electricity that we buy. So there's a blog that one of my colleagues, Ray, has written that's coming out in the next week or so about that. It's been quite an interesting piece of work in itself. We're in a rented building, so heating's a bit challenging. It's something we need to discuss with our landlord. We need to consider whether maybe we could find a lower carbon office and whether this would have unintended impacts if it led to a higher commute, for example. And something I'll talk about in pillar 3 is looking at green gas tariffs or carbon reduction projects. So that's our sort of pillar 1 action plan. Hannah, could I have a slide, please? So pillar 2 is where things start to get, they can seem a bit more complicated, but actually it can be relatively straightforward. So this is looking at everything else. So looking at scope 3, your value chain emissions. So pillar 2 is the same exercise really. It's setting a baseline year and getting an understanding of what your scope 3 emissions are likely to be. it's really important to try and get an understanding of these, because for many organisations, the Scope 3 emissions can represent the largest amount of a company's footprint. So I think IKEA's assessment suggested that 96% of their emissions were under Scope 3. So if they just focused on Scope 1 and 2, then they could be ignoring some really big impacts that they could have just by changing the way they work with their supply chain. So I think it's something that's quite important to measure. It can seem a bit daunting, but actually there's various sort of screening approaches that you can take to do this. So I've put on a couple of screenshots there, one from the government guidelines where they have emissions intensity factors for every pound spent in all the different SIC code sectors. So you can quite simply take your financial accounts and convert them into carbon estimates as a way of trying to understand which areas that you're spending in might have the biggest impact. The Greenhouse Gas Protocol also produces Scope 3 screening tool, which I've used. Some areas of that can be a bit challenging because it's in dollars, so you have to do some exchange rate work. But between the two of them, you can get a reasonably good idea of what your value chain emissions might be and where you might need to focus your efforts to try and reduce that sort of additional footprint that's maybe not under your direct control, but certainly under your influence. And I recognise that as Regen, we've taken a pretty broad look at our Scope 3 emissions and tried to include as much as possible, which, yeah, has been interesting and challenging at times. But the idea is that ooh, that's exciting. I could go on to the next slide, I think, Hannah, please. The idea is to get an understanding of broadly what are the other emissions. And so you can see for us on our 2019 assessment, 92% of our emissions in 2019 were Scope 3, so things outside our direct use of energy in the office effectively. And our top 5 Scope 3 sources make up 70% of our total. So we've got a few really big hitters there. And that was quite interesting to find out. And we've included things where Regen has influence, not really direct responsibility, but things like staff commute, things like the pension funds, which are technically owned by the employees, but Regen can have a role in helping people understand how they can choose to invest their pension fund. And things like delegate travel to events. We've obviously had a change in 2020 with that, but as we get back to more in-person events, that's something where we're going to be starting to gather better data. We've always had a strong policy of locating our events close to public transport and trying to encourage people to travel in a low carbon way where possible. And in the future, we're going to be trying to gather better data about how people are actually doing that to see if we can reduce that further. So for us, looking at that Scope 3 was quite an interesting exercise and found out a couple of sort of surprising things. Another slide, please, Hannah. And from that, can we go back a few? There we go. There we go. There. Great, thank you. So from that, we were able to create a Pillar 2 action plan. So looking again at low carbon commuting for staff, supporting bike to work, looking at rail season ticket loans, flexible work hours so people can use public transport. We're looking at installing EV charging, considering an EV salary sacrifice scheme. I won't read through all of these things there, but the point is that framework of looking at our Scope 3 emissions allowed us to contextualize and plan for how we could reduce all of those emissions, and in some cases make fairly simple changes to reduce those Scope 3 emissions and have a bigger impact than some of the things that we could do in the office to our Scope 1 and 2, which whilst are very important, can be quite challenging to reduce. So it's trying to take that broad look at where we can make our biggest impact. I have another slide, please. Ooh. Back one. Yeah, forward one. Back one, I think. There we go. So those first 2 pillars are, are sort of, I guess, the core of the accounting approach. And then Pillar 3 is about integrating climate in your business strategy. So reviewing your business model, understanding what a net zero company version of your company looks like and how it's going to be aligned with an exponential reduction trajectory. And then integrating climate strategy into your current products and your future products. Some companies are using internal price on carbon to enable this, which is an interesting thing that we've been considering at Regen. And obviously working with other businesses that are aligned with net zero, working with your supply chain and talking to your supply chain. And then part of that as well is for those emissions that you can't remove is looking at carbon reduction projects, and for the long-term residual emissions that in net zero will still be there is looking at carbon removal projects. And there's a whole area to discuss there. I worked setting up voluntary carbon offset projects in a previous role. It's a really interesting area, something we haven't addressed at Regen yet, and something I'm not going to talk about today because you could talk at length about it. But yeah, I mean, perhaps that's a subject for the discussion in a bit. Have a slide, please, Hannah. Okay. So from there, we've been able to create a Pillar 3 action plan. Clearly, Regen is a mission-led organisation focused on transforming the energy system to meet net zero. So it's already at the heart of our mission. But the work that I've been doing has been to form an internal sustainability task force in 2019 to start looking at this. And then when the SME Climate Hub and Race to Zero was launched, we signed up to that and revised our environmental policy to reflect that. We've more recently revised our procurement policy to encourage anyone that we're working with to sign up to Race to Zero. We'd like to move in the longer term to making that a requirement. There's obviously limits to what we can demand of our supply chain. And as I said, we're looking at carbon credit removal projects. It's an area that we're going to be looking at internally and discussing later this year. So that's our sort of Pillar 3 action plan that we formed. Can I have a slide, please? Don't know if that was one or two. Was that one? I'll go with this one. So Pillar 4 is about influencing climate action in society. So that's doing what we're doing now, which is opening up that discussion with other people, recognizing not everyone is at the same point on the journey. Some people have done a huge amount more than we've done. Some people will have just been thinking about it today. So part of your sort of responsibility in having that net zero commitment is talking to others about it, sharing your learning, and we're doing that through blogs and newsletters, joining industry events. I'm talking at a number of industry events and doing things like this, working with our members to try and share that knowledge and encourage people to look at this and understand that there's opportunities as well as challenges in there. So yeah, next slide, I think. So almost an overwhelming array of resources out there. So the reason I put this slide up is, for me, there's 4 key things that I find really, really useful in this process, and it will be different for different industries. But for me, the core tools have been the SME Climate Hub playbook, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, which I've revisited. I haven't reread it. I read it a long time ago, but I've revisited bits and bobs of it recently. The Government Environmental Reporting Guidelines and the DEFRA emissions factors, which are updated every year. These are all really, really useful resources, and the core ones for me. The SME Climate Hub has a list of other tools. Some of them are very sector specific, and I understand that they're working on a sort of simplified reporting tool for SMEs to use that they're launching later in the year, although I don't know any more about that. But that's the sort of purpose of that slide, is really just to, I guess, my top tips. So I've whistled through that a little bit. I could talk at length about most of those different points. Hopefully that gives you sort of an interesting combined sort of overview of the strategy and guidance that SME Climate Hub can provide, and how Regen's approached it as a sort of small consultancy organisation. It will be different for different types of organisations who have offices and equipment and do different things, but that's our experience of it today. So yeah, that's me, and I think I'm handing now directly over to Alex at GEMSERV.
Great, thanks, Mark. Yeah, Alex, if you could talk us through your experience, that would be brilliant.
Yeah, okay. Well, great. Thanks for inviting me along today, and great to meet everyone on this call. It's a bit daunting because I've seen some of the roles that people have got: sustainability managers, directors, etc. But what I'm going to do today is talk about what GEMSERV did. Just talk you through the practical stuff that we did to become carbon neutral, and I'll touch on, someone raised this in the chat just now, I'll touch on what we've done around offsets as well. So hopefully that will stimulate a bit of a chat around that, because it'd be great to get everyone's views on that particular matter. Can we start the slides? Thanks. Okay, now next slide, please. I think it skipped a few. It's definitely a runaway on this one. Could you go back one, please? Okay, could you try?
Apologies all, I'm just trying to fix our runaway presentation at the moment. So I'm in the background figuring it out. I will be 2 seconds, 2 shakes of a tail feather.
Being kept on our toes today. It was looking too easy for you, Alex. So
I see. I'll just explain where I am. We're in. I'm in our London head office today. So I have used some carbon to get into the office, but I needed to meet with some people face to face. It's pretty quiet still on this side of London. We discussed this earlier. We're on the city side. It's a bit busier on the West End, but it seems to be picking up. At the start of the lockdown, I took a picture of the tube with no one on it in rush hour, and it was substantially busier today. Okay, brilliant. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just touch quickly on who we are before I explain what we've done. So in terms of what we do, as it says on the screen, professional services company in a world driven by data and technology. We are explicitly focused on achieving positive social and environmental outcomes in what we do. And we're just in the process of becoming a B Corp, if that means anything to you. It's an American scheme, quite a high standard of ESG is required to get that accreditation. In particular, the business that we do is very much focused on the energy transition and low carbon. So we do a lot of work. Actually, interesting, probably our pillar 3 would be negative, because we do a lot of work around smart metering, EVs, renewable heat, hydrogen. So that's the work that we do. In terms of where we are, so London head office, office in Birmingham, and an office in Dublin, and we're working across a number of different sectors, but as I said, most of it's around energy and low carbon. Okay, could we move to the next slide, please? Okay, so as I've touched on a bit of this, so we tackle today's social and environmental challenges. We harness digital transformation. So we're particularly interested actually in the journey to net zero for very large organizations and for countries and crown dependencies, because this change will drive this goal will drive change within an organization, I suppose, particularly around people, process and technology, and we play very strongly into that in a commercial way. This will link back to why we became carbon neutral some time ago. Move to the next slide, please. So just in terms of that, we became carbon neutral in 2018. We did that because it's really crucial to what we're about. We want to be part of other people's supply chains, so we can say in anything we do that we are carbon neutral. So that helps with organisations, as Mark talked about earlier, who want to decarbonise their supply chain. So in terms of what we did, this is very classic consultancy. This is, we looked at where we currently are, and we looked at where we want to be, and then that's the gap. So then we developed the plan. So data is really crucial to this, and Mark touched on how you might do that. And I totally agree with what Mark said. I think don't spend ages trying to work out exactly how many miles you've travelled in taxis. It's, you can approximate it, and that will be good enough for this for a lot of people. We then looked at different bits. So people, so we looked at how we could change behaviour within our organisation, with our staff, and the way that they commute into the office. We looked at incentives around that. We looked at the processes that we employ within our business and how we can change those and reduce carbon. And we looked at technology, and again implemented that within our business to reduce carbon. And then finally, we've got a residual amount of carbon that is pretty hard to remove, probably impossible. And you bought offsets. And I'll touch on what we did. And then I suppose the third thing, once you've developed your plan, you understand your gap, is then just put some resources onto it, right? So either do it with your own resources or bring in external support for that, or a bit of both. It's not something we do particularly to sell to SMEs. We're working on with other organisations on decarbonisation strategies for very large organisations. But you know, for a smaller organisation, you should be able to do this within your own own teams. It took us just over a year to do. So we started in 2017. Next slide, please. So just in terms of why we did it, because this is one of the questions the Regen guys asked me. Well, you know, we could see it, well, apart from the very obvious point around it's the right thing to do, we could see business opportunities, and it's specifically around what we do already in this space. But I think, you know, if we run forward with this, and you've got lots of big organisations making their commitment to net zero and government, we're increasingly seeing this coming through in bids and, that we go for, where they're asking, well, what are you doing in this space? And so this actually helps us to win work now. So there's a commercial driver for this. I just wanted to touch on that. I think, again, because of the work we do, a lot of the staff that we hire, who are I'm one of the oldies at GEMSERV, a lot of the staff are very environmentally conscious. So this was great for staff retention and attraction. We've just talking about this before the call. We've got about 60 new staff this year that I haven't met, only on Teams. But you know, actually bringing them into the business, is that if we can say we're carbon neutral, we are carbon neutral, then that's a big attraction. And I think the final thing is that the gap was achievable. We could see how we would solve the challenge that was before us, and a reasonable time frame, rather than putting in place a goal and then not achieving it, or doing it in a way that's not the right way to do it. So that's the reason why we went for net zero. And it's not the end of the journey either. So we've done what we can do. We've got a accreditation that we're carbon neutral. We're going to keep looking at that though, and we're going to challenge ourselves around offsets. We've got an embedded plan within our business. I'll come back to this in a second. That means that we will reduce our carbon emissions year on year within this model. And next slide, please. All right, so I'll just pick out some things. So I think Mark's touched on some of this. Obviously, we don't have all the good ideas. I've written down a few from his list that I'll try and implement here. So you know, in terms of people and behaviour, the CSR team set up a separate team around called the Green Team, and they send out a newsletter initiatives, and they try and galvanise the staff around this particular around net zero. We implemented a change to our terms, and we give an extra day's leave if you use low carbon travel for your holidays. Unfortunately, we did that just as COVID came in, so it hasn't been well used yet, but I'm hopeful it will be well used. We've put it into our company targets, so if we don't do it, it impacts our bonuses. Work anywhere, so we put this in place last year again to reduce commuting, and because, well, partly because of COVID, but also because we want to reduce lots of travelling all over the place. So staff can work anywhere, and that has a big impact on carbon because of the carbon coming from commuting that we've got within our business. I'll skip over a few things here. We've EV only lease scheme. We've just launched that, so massive tax break for individuals if you hire an EV through your company. It's a really easy thing to do, but you have to have, I think there's a certain asset requirement within your organisation to be able to lease the cars. But it's a great thing for staff because it means they get a full tax break on the company car that they can lease through the scheme. In terms of technology, we've done a lot of things that Mark talked about. We've changed equipment to make it low carbon things. So we've got lights that switch off and the screens switch off. We've got a lot of glare. You can probably see behind me, but it was worse before. We've put materials on the windows to reduce the glare and improve the aircon. Again, lots of people have done this, invested in technology to make face-to-face meetings more doable. We've got to spend a lot of money in our meeting rooms to make all that work as well. In terms of the data, when we looked at this, we've 250 tonnes per annum of carbon that we produce. That's including all the commuting and business travel. We've gone up as a total amount because we've hired more people, we've got bigger in what we do, but actually we've got year-on-year reductions on a per head count basis. So I think we're moving in the right direction. Next slide, please. So, and again, just coming to the last point, we were left with a residual. So we purchased gold standard offsets. The current offsets is a scheme in China around cooking facilities. So I know the controversial, but we wanted to be carbon neutral. We think we've got trust in the scheme. It's well audited, this scheme. And we pick something. I think the other, I suppose, point is that, do you pick something that's UK based? There's a good argument for that, or do you pick something that is overseas, and in which case there's probably cheaper to achieve your carbon offsets that way than in the UK. So that's what we actually did to become carbon neutral. Next slide, please. Good. Okay, so just to add, we've signed up for the SME Climate Hub as well, and yeah, we're happy to take questions on any of that when we get to the question part. Thank you.
Oh, great. Thanks, Alex. Thank you, Mark. Yeah, really interesting presentations on our journeys to net zero and at different stages as well, which I think is quite helpful for everyone. So yeah, if I could ask those, or all of you, if possible, to whack your cameras on so we can have a proper discussion, that would be really good. So Mark, I just wanted to touch there on the kind of tricky issue of offsets and to get your view on yeah, what you think, I guess, a kind of option of last resort, but it'd be good to hear your view on that.
Yeah, okay. Well, I haven't looked in depth at offsets for a number of years, actually. And so I probably don't have a position per se on it at the moment, but I think it's certainly it's factual to say that there are emissions that at present we cannot do anything about in the immediate, next year. And there are definitely emissions that in the long term, in 20, 30 years, will still be there. So there is definitely a need for carbon removals, as well as carbon reductions. I think that there can be a lot of value in funding carbon reduction projects. So, looking at our emissions, there's things that we cannot do this year. So if we wanted to contribute to reducing global emissions, I think it's reasonable to invest in projects that offer genuine emission reductions where they are additional. And I think what's challenging is proving that you're offering reductions and proving that it's additional. And that can be quite challenging. So I spent a couple of years in a previous role setting up voluntary gold standard carbon offset projects in East Africa, to improve cook stove projects. They're sort of similar to the sort of offset that Alex mentioned. I think they can be really positive projects and they can be really valuable. And I think it's just one of those things that shouldn't prevent action in the first place. So shouldn't prevent going through the process that I've talked about of understanding and looking at how you can realistically reduce your emissions, but are something that should be considered, provided that you can, be assured that you're investing in something that's offering a genuine benefit. And it becomes very complicated because often these projects are in developing countries, and you get into a whole world of issues around development and development aid, which is can be very complicated. But there's organisations out there that you can sort of trust and that can help you. So very long-winded answer, slightly on the fence, but can be really valuable.
Thanks, Mark. Sonia, it was something you raised a bit earlier in the chat. Is that do you want to come in?
Yeah, sure. So we've I live in Somerset on the Somerset Levels, and we have a net zero target for our local parish, and we have a number of themes working to reduce emissions through that, the usual energy, housing, but we also have a community energy group which is delivering projects, and in the village there was it's quite an affluent place to live, and there is one of those last vestiges of travel agents within the village as well, and we felt this wasn't sitting so well with our aspirations to be a zero carbon parish. And so we approached the travel agent quite trepidatiously, if that's the right word, and said, look, we're trying to achieve, our parish is trying to combat the effects of climate change, reduce our emissions, and you're in the village and you're selling some fairly high-end traveling options to people in the village. We don't want to shut you down, because that's not the way to get people on board and get working with us. So we said, for every person that comes in and buys a holiday, would you be prepared to direct them to the community energy group, and for them to make a contribution to putting projects on the ground, energy projects and planting projects. So we've got a forest and an orchard and a food forest as well. And the travel agent were really receptive to that and said, yes, we will do that. So, and we allow people to offset their guilt anonymously if they want, by just putting cold hard cash into our bank account. And it has, I mean, obviously COVID, this was just before COVID, so there's been less traveling happening since then, but it was a start anyway. And it also got people's awareness of the effects and mitigating the effects of their transport options, and more money raised for us to put projects that were really directly affecting the local community as well. And because we've seen the effects of climate change with the flooding in our area, it was quite good to link all of those things together and go, look, we can do something about this. So it's very basic and primitive at the moment, but we're hoping to increase and do it through other businesses locally as well, and allowing businesses to contribute towards the zero targets and actually see their projects in action.
Oh, thanks, Sonia. That's really interesting. Okay, so we've got a poll just to kind of.
Got on mute, Rachel.
Yeah, sorry, whoopsie. So we've got a poll so that we can just see where everyone is on their journey. So so one, are you thinking about signing up to the Race to Zero? So already joined, very keen. I think those are your two options. I know Hannah has put some others. Thinking about it. So and it'd be good to drop in the chat like what support you might need, or if we do follow-on sessions, what would be really helpful. And then the second question there as well is, have you started your own net zero journey without the Race to Zero campaign? And then it would be good to kind of start on that. So great, good to see. So there's a few of you that aren't sure and are thinking about it. The majority of you, it's kind of flexing around. Okay. Bro, that's interesting. But lots of you are thinking about this already as a kind of key area, which I guess is testament to you devoting your time to this today. So I think the majority of you are thinking about it and very keen or already joined. There's definitely no no's in this. That's important. So that's great. And then you can just see the results there that I've shared on the poll, so you can see. And then lots of people have already started thinking about their emissions. So I had a question to kick us off for Mark. So what have you been surprised by as part of the process? I guess you got the team together, set up a kind of Regen, I can't think what you called us now. You gave us a name when we all sat down together.
The Sustainability Task Force.
That's it, yes.
Wanted it to sound exciting.
So what things have you been surprised by as part of the process?
So I think as a team, we were probably a bit surprised about business travel. That business travel was a bit less than we thought it would be. We thought that would be a really big slice of what we did. But I think that probably speaks to the fact that Regen's had quite a long history of trying to reduce emissions in a sort of slightly more informal or less calculating way. So we've already had quite a long-term strong policy to, going on the train if you really can and try not to get on an aeroplane. So that was really interesting. The sort of impact of the pension fund was really, really interesting. For us, it was quite surprising. As I said, it's sort of not Regen's because it belongs to the employees, but it is money that comes from Regen. And it's something that Regen can sort of, I guess, help facilitate our staff understanding. So it's something that we are continuing to measure. But that was an area that surprised us. And it's something that has, I guess it's a really good example of saying, well, the data on that's not amazing, but it indicates that that could be quite a significant part of the emissions that occur as part of our activities. So it's kind of directed us to having a little bit more of an in-depth look at that, talking to our pensions provider and arranging sessions for the team to understand And you know, we've got quite a lot of young members to the team, which I'm technically not probably a young member of the team, but I you know, personally, I've never really looked at my pension and where it's invested, and it's probably not aligned with my values. So there's a whole piece around that where you're not just sort of bean counting carbon footprints here, you're looking at sort of the broader ethics of what you're doing and where money goes. So that's been a really interesting exercise and interesting piece of work. And for me, the whole thing continues to open up interesting discussions and challenge the way we do things and think about, you know, how can we further reduce business travel? We already have a really good policy. And then even in the last week, I'd sort of have said, oh, actually, maybe we could use a car club and we could ask staff to use the car club EVs, because most of our staff still own diesel cars because EVs are really expensive. And that could be a way to reducing the business travel emissions. And that's kind of an interesting sideways step to reducing them, where initially you might think, oh, well, there's nothing we could do about that. So for me, it's kind of an endless iterative process of conversations within the team and with people externally to get those gems of ideas and go, oh yeah, okay, actually we could all benefit in this way. And that's, yeah, I think part of the value of doing this whole thing is having these sorts of conversations and getting people thinking about it and all sort of starting to pull in that direction. I'll stop talking.
Oh, great, thank you, Mark. Alex, I had a question as well. So we had a few we have a few challenges that we haven't resolved yet at Regen by not owning our office building, and I didn't know whether you guys own your buildings.
No, we haven't gone down that route. This building would be, it's above Fenchurch Street Station, so we'd probably have to buy the station as well. I was going to actually touch on that. One of the issues we've got is we just get a bill that's been divided between the properties in the building. One of the things that's in the recommendation, the gap that we did was around looking at sub-metering. We haven't done that yet, so we are approximating the gas and electricity. But given you know, about half the company have come from the energy industry, I think we should be pretty close to what it actually is. We're a pretty standard office building, so that's what we've got, the same challenge as you. We don't own the building, but the things we can do, for instance, like I said, the low glare, the screens that people use, all of that we can do. And we also we put pressure on the landlord actually to we put some hives on the roof, right? Because there's, you know, to encourage bees. So that's one of the things we did around, again, behavioural change, getting people to really get involved in sustainability around the subject matter that we work in. So I don't know if that answers your question, Rachel.
Yeah, that's helpful. I think, yeah, maybe we've all got a role to play in influencing the people that we share our buildings with.
I think landlords understand the direction of travel as well. So, you know, we did push them to put solar panels on the roof, but they were unable to do that. I think we probably used up our slots with the hives for the time being, but maybe down the line.
Great, thank you. And Jerry, I see you've got your hand. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask a question?
Yeah, thanks. If I may, I'll just give 2 or 3 examples of things that GridServe are doing, and then just ask a couple of questions a question to Mark and to Alex. So at GridServe, we recently took over the electric highway EV charging network from Ecotricity, and all of that charging on that network is with zero net carbon electricity. And we're also constructing the first solar electric forecourt, where there will be a solar farm co-located with 24 350 kilowatt ultra high speed chargers. So we'll actually be zero carbon as opposed to zero net carbon. We also have a electric vehicle leasing where if you choose to take charging included as part of that lease, then we plant 100 trees for every lease. And that's with the objective of partially offsetting some of the carbon that went into manufacturing the vehicle in the first place. And so these are some of the things we're doing. As part of our journey, we're using ISO 14064, and that will enable us to get our formal auditing and our formal reporting in place. And I'd just be keen to understand from Alex and Mark how you go about the formal auditing and the formal reporting of the great actions that you're taking.
Great, thanks, Jerry. Some great stuff there that you're doing. I was also really pleased to see that you're taking over the eco-tricity charges, so they hopefully might work. Now I'm a proud owner of an EV.
Well, I forgot to say we also have we've recruited a biodiversity and nature sanctuary employee whose role is with solar farms that we build is to make sure that we are improving the biodiversity of the solar farms. And just picking up on Alex's point with regards to hives on the roof, we thought naively 3 or 4 years ago that we could just put some beehives next to the solar farms and that would be great. And that's when we were told, no, that would be the worst thing you could do, because actually the bees that you put on site would then want to be fighting for the food that the existing bees are already there with. And so you need to have a biodiversity approach that both increases the amount of opportunities for pollination and food for the bees before just putting a hive in place, which was quite an interesting point. Sorry, I'll stop now.
No, that's great. Alex, Mark, do you want to come back on Jerry's question there?
So I could talk about what we do. We have annual auditing of where we are against the carbon neutral standard. So that allows us to keep that. And actually, we've just been audited for annual report, financial audit, and our auditors wanted to see that and make sure we are that, because we put it in our annual report to say that we're carbon neutral. So I haven't heard of the ISO standard that Jerry mentioned. But we would look at that if that was more robust than what we're already doing. But we do get externally audited against what we've done, and also, like I said, the balance being offset with gold standard offsets that allows us to make the carbon neutral claim. So, but very impressed by what Jerry's done at GridServe. That sounds amazing. Actually, that's done really well. On the hives, just to add, we didn't just plonk them up there. We did get advice on that. I think probably less of a competition issue in the city for bees, perhaps. But so like I said, I don't think that that's not a carbon neutral thing. That's just a sustainability thing. We do a lot of work with our volunteering around conservation as well. So it's all about the message, the culture at GEMSERV that we're promoting to staff and to our clients. That's part of. So hopefully that deals with your question, Jerry.
Well, great, thank you.
Yeah.
I just thought it was also, I noticed, Alex, you said that you jotted down some ideas that Mark had put on his slide, and no doubt Mark's jotted down some ideas that you had in your slide. So I thought it might be a good opportunity if anyone wanted to kind of chip in, either in the chat or in person, in terms of ideas that they think are helpful for companies to kind of take forward and how we can kind of address this area. Or if anyone, I can't see any hands, so if anyone else has got got a question.
Yeah, I didn't know how to do it electronically, but
that's fine, just wave at me.
I did just want to jump in. Sorry about the darkness, but I've got bright sunshine behind me as well, so I feel like I'm in the man of mystery in silhouette. Anyone who remembers the man from Milk Tray? There you go. Right. So on the business travel point, I noticed that there are a lot of companies now, like Jerry's project, where they're looking to replace their existing fleet with EV. Yes, reducing business travel in the context of the petrol and diesel type fleet vehicles is fine, but is the message from the panel that we are reducing business travel per se, or are we in fact saying that, okay, if you happen to be generating your energy from a sustainable source, that we're going to encourage more business travel as a result of that? Because I think that's one area, and it becomes quite an interesting debate point with a lot of companies who are at an earlier point in this journey than perhaps some of the people here on the panel, that they're saying, well, I want to become more green, but you have to give me a toolkit to get around my basic business problem. Number one, if I sell things, I need to see people. And I want to keep on seeing people, and I do not want to allow this green hurdle, as it were, to get in my way of doing so. Otherwise, I'll do it, but I will barely comply. Yeah, and I think that from what I'm seeing and the momentum that's building from Alex's points as well, this idea that we're seeing this kind of groundswell, the paradigm shift in a focus on carbon neutrality and in fact carbon negativity, what does that mean in practicality? So I think that's a question to all of you. I'd like to hear maybe how you have wrestled with that particular issue, and then what your feelings are about practical application.
Great, thanks, Howard. Okay, so Mark and Alex, how do you leap over green hurdles?
Yeah, I'm happy to chip in on that with, I guess, a personal perspective, which is, so personally, I've been sort of involved in this sort of thing for over a decade, and I passionately believe that it's really important not to keep being green or being low carbon in a niche by being viewed as the killjoy who wants everyone to stop doing what they're doing because it's bad for the planet. So my personal view on that is that fundamentally the reason that we're trying to deal with climate change is because we want to prolong our existence on this planet and continue to enjoy it. The planet would probably be fine without us. If we let runaway climate change happen, life would continue in some form or another. So the point of it is that we're trying to maintain our way of life. And in tackling climate change, we want to maintain doing what we're doing and enjoying what we're enjoying. So my personal view is that we all need to keep doing largely what we're doing, having the same outcomes, but we need to find greener ways of doing it. So in some instances, there is an argument for reducing consumption and so on and so forth. But broadly, I don't think the solution is to just stop doing stuff because that's greener, because ultimately that doesn't give us the same utility and the same outcomes. So yeah, I'm not an advocate of saying, well, we just need to stop traveling for business. Sorry, find a different business. It's okay, how can we continue to do our business and do it in a greener way that benefits the planet as well as allowing us to continue to do what we do? That's probably my personal ethos on that.
Oh, great.
I'd agree with that, Mark, totally. I don't think it works. If you tell people you can't do it, you start saying to developing countries, or as recently it's level 1, 2, 3, 4. If you start saying to people, you can't buy a car, you can't buy a motorbike because of it's just not going to work. So, and coming back to business travel, I mean, practically what we've done is we pay a very measly pence per mile if you want to drive your petrol or diesel car to a business meeting, and actively encourage people to take the train. We can't do much about international travel. I mean, getting to the Dublin office, it would be very tricky without flying, and that's where the offsets come in. Love it if we could get to biofuels in aeroplanes, etc. But that's probably some way down the line. So we do what we can to encourage that. I don't think it works to tell clients that we can't come and see them. The reason I'm in the office today is I need to have a face-to-face meeting with one of my clients. To say that I'm not going to do that because of the carbon impact, I don't think would work. So it's about, but I've come in by train and I cycle to the station. So, and just as a final on that, at home, I've got an interesting one. Wife and daughter are both vegetarian. I'm not. I'm constantly under pressure to reduce the amount of meat I eat. So I have done that as well, but I'm still eating meat. So I think, it's about changing what you're doing and putting the right nudges in place so that others do the same. So that's my view.
Great, thanks both, and thanks for your contributions today. Thanks everyone. I think we'll bring today to a close, but just to say this is the first session. We want to kind of take our members all on our journey with us and kind of share in our experience and steal hints and tips off one another to make the process more efficient and easier to do. So there was quite a lot of you who were kind of thinking about it, so I kind of want to get you across the line to committing to the Race to Zero. And once you've signed that lovely piece of paper, let me and Mark know that you've signed up to the Race to Zero. And if there's anything we can share about what we've done, any of the documents that we've used, etc., then we're really happy to do that, really open. So do you want to try and make this journey as easy for everyone as possible where we can? So thank you very much, and we'll finish on time, and really lovely to see all your faces. So thank you, and thanks Mark and Alex.
Great,
Take care,
thanks all.
everyone.